We are recording the interview of Richard Lentz. This interview is being conducted by David Morse from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at the Crown Plaza in Dayton, Ohio. It is 12:42 p.m. On July 10th, 2019. All right, so Rick, that's what you go by, right?
Yes.
Let's start off with when and where you were born.
Okay, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio in May of 1946.
Okay, all right. An Ohio native, that's
Yes.
good, that's good. Who are your parents?
Richard Lentz and Irene Katrin Lentz.
Okay, and what were their occupation?
My father worked for Gulf Oil Refinery in Houven, Ohio, outside of Cincinnati, and then later was a pilot for a small company in Cincinnati, Ohio. My mom was a housewife.
Okay,
Stay-at-home mom.
that's a major job right there. Major job. So do you have any siblings?
I have my sister Karen, who's 4 years younger than I am.
Okay.
And then my parents divorced and both remarried, and so I have a half brother who lives with my sister in Cincinnati now.
Oh, nice, nice. Now, any of your siblings, did they join the military at all?
I had one stepbrother who was in the Big Red Run, the 1st Infantry Division in South Vietnam in 65, 66.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Man. All right, so then before military service, what were you doing?
I was at University of Cincinnati.
Okay.
I graduated 50 years ago next month from the University of Cincinnati. Was accepted into the Air Force. Was supposed to go into September of '69, and they delayed me till January of 1970.
Okay.
And so I went to officer training school, and it was what they call 89-day wonder. I was commissioned as second lieutenant on 2 April 1970.
Okay. So while you're in the University of Cincinnati, were you already planning on going into the military, or was this something, an afterthought?
Well, it wasn't an afterthought, but I wasn't initially planning on it. Much to my father's chagrin, I turned down an appointment to any military academy when I came out of high school. I wasn't ready. But after 4 years at college, I was ready, and I wanted to go into the Air Force. And so I took and passed the Air Force Officer's Qualification Test for pilot training.
Oh, wow. What was your degree in?
Political science.
Political science.
With a minor in psychology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And wow, and you took it, the pilot test or the officer test, and you passed on the first go round.
First go round, yeah.
I know guys that are in, like, while I was in college, that are taking engineering and all these other courses that, you know, apparently are more related to that, and have failed, like, just, I mean, by 1 or 2 points or something like that, but just cannot quite get that pass that test.
Well, I came out of a military family. My dad was in the Air Force, Army Air Corps in World War II, and then went into the Air Force Reserves. I loved airplanes. I loved everything about flying, and so it wasn't that difficult for me to do that.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty cool. So a lot of influence from your dad.
From my dad,
yeah.
Right? And other family members that had served in World War II, uncles and so forth, yeah.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I'm 3rd generation military myself, so I understand that perspective. So you graduate, you decide to join, to go into the pilot program.
Yes.
What was that like?
I washed out after 2 months. So it was not fun for me. I mean, I enjoyed it, and there was a couple circumstances, things happened, and I washed out. And so the Air Force gave me two choices. You can go sit in a missile silo, or you can go to nav school and still get to be on airplanes. So I went to navigator's school at Mayfair Air Force Base and graduated from there near the top of my class. And had initially wanted to be in the backseat of fighters and then try to get back into pilot training. And I had some guys that were flown C-130s out of Taiwan, the Philippines, Southeast Asia, and they're telling me all these stories, what a great airplane it is. So I took the C-130 and was assigned to Taichung, Taiwan, Ching Chuang Kong Air Base, or CCK Air Base.
CCK, yeah. All right, let's go back a little bit to nav school. Describe to me a little bit about nav school. What was that like?
I don't want to get myself in trouble. It wasn't as disciplined as going through pilot training. It wasn't as disciplined as going through officer school. But we studied navigation, astronomy, all the things we needed to do to learn how to navigate an airplane and get it from point A to point B, over land, over sea, and different types of aircraft, because you didn't know. And so we would fly simulated over water missions up and down the valley there in California, and turn around somewhere around Bakersfield and come back north. 7 students to an airplane, if I remember right, with a pilot and a co-pilot, and we would give them directions and tell them what one of us would be in charge. And so we would be the lead navigator, would say, we're going here and we're going to do this, and then you just practice your navigation techniques. And that lasted from July of 1970 until April of 1971.
Wow.
When we graduated.
Okay.
And they had, at any one time, they had about 5 different classes going on at Mayfair Air Force Base for that.
Okay.
And we partied a lot. And I'll leave it at that.
Yes. Okay. Now, at this point, for navigation, most of what I know about navigation is one of two things. It's either old World War II, where most of the mathematics and navigation is based off of maps and all manually done.
Correct.
Or instrumentation.
Right.
For you, which was it?
It was
Or both?
a mix of both.
A mix of both. Okay.
We used basic navigation techniques using sextants when we're flying over water, whether we're looking at the sun and taking measurements, or a sun and the moon, or in evening or early morning, maybe a sun and a star. The more lines you have that you can make cross on your map, the better you are at knowing where you're exactly at over the Earth. And then at night, you could do 2 stars and the moon, or 3-star fixes, which were the best. And they would give you a little tiny, if you did it right, a real tiny triangle, so you knew where you were within 1 or 2 miles on the surface of the Earth.
Oh, wow.
We also had what we call Doppler radar. It's a system that could give you your airspeed, your wind speeds, and what we call drift, where you are, or how you have to turn the plane to fly in a straight line, which could be flying, the plane's pointing this way, but you're actually flying like that. And then we had some analog computers, so to speak, that we could put the information into, and it would give us a readout of where we were, latitude and longitude. Sometimes they didn't work real well, and so then you just did everything. It's you, your map, and your compass, and your airspeed indicators, and that's how you figured out where you were. And if you had cloudy nights, cloudy days, then it was the old drift and airspeed. The wind speed, where's the wind coming from, what's your airspeed, what's your ground speed, and that's how you figured out where you were.
Wow.
And you'd just put little circles on your map till you could get to a place where you could really identify and put your little triangle on your map and say, we're right here for sure. And you had things like high frequency radios that could be used at certain, up to 300 miles from the station. And we also, when we got closer to destinations from flying over water, you always had the VOR, radio operated signals that came and would give you direction, a very accurate direction to where you're going. And they had something called TACAN, which would give you mileage from the destination. So when you're flying over land, it basically the navigator could sleep and the pilot and co-pilot could figure out where they were going. For basic missions, for basic missions. And then when I went to C-141s later on, we had a little bit better computers. And then by the 1980s, for the most part, we navigators were replaced by mechanical machines, you know, GPSs and other digital computers.
Yeah.
Just same as the airlines use.
Right. Okay. Wow. All right. So you said you got through training, and what was your first duty from that point?
Okay, my first duty station was at Chingchuan Air Base.
Oh, so that was
my first duty station after I finished C-130 training at Pope Air Force Base.
Pope, okay.
And I went over there, and our job was to basically provide supplies to all types of units, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
Okay, and so on most of our missions were pretty routine.
Uh-huh.
You fly from point A to point B to point C to point D to point A, or from point A to point B to point A to point B to point A to point B, depending on what you were doing and what you were hauling. And sometimes we would go to remote fields where one of our air crews would take in what we call a tactical control team, and they would set up, and they had, you know, small arms, maybe a machine gun to protect themselves. There'd be 4 or 5 guys, and they would have a forklift to offload aircraft or to move pallets around, and we'd bring all the supplies for the local army or the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN units. We'd be bringing in their supplies, and then we'd land, be on the ground 15 minutes to a half hour. We'd take off again. 2 hours later or less, we'd be back, and there might be 6, 8 airplanes doing that all day long, from sunrise to sunset.
Wow.
And then you go in, the last plane that went in empty, and you brought out that tactical control team because you didn't want them spending the night there because they probably wouldn't make it through the night.
Wow.
So those are some of the interesting, you know, things that we did that for us were routine and normal.
Yeah. So before you got your orders to CCK, how many flying hours did you have?
Let's see. I probably had about 75 to 80 hours in the aircraft.
Wow.
Because the first part of the training was over water navigation. So from Pope, we'd fly down to Puerto Rico. One student would fly down, be the navigator down. The next student be the navigator back. But you still got to log all 10 hours, 10 or 11 hours on the airplane. And we did that 2 times, and then it took a check ride. Down there and back and past that. And then came back and started the airdrop part. And so we were dropping Army troops on big, huge, 1 mile wide by 2 mile long drop zones. If you can't get them done in that drop zone, you're not very good. So we got a couple times I got to drop, besides troops, I got to drop equipment, generally Jeeps, some other heavy stuff on big metal pallets that would go down. And so those missions might be 4 to 5 hours. So maybe, now that I think about it, maybe I only had about 50 hours in the aircraft.
Wow.
When they said, you're checked out. For me, it was pretty simple stuff.
Yeah.
And most navigators got through in that amount of time.
Sure. But, I mean, that's, it seems like, right from training to real combat situations, not a lot of hours there.
No, there's not. It was probably worse for Army guys.
Man.
Here's your rifle, keep it clean. Here's how to shoot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put on your jungle fatigues, off you go.
Yeah.
Or in today's world, put on your whatever fatigues we need for the sand or whatever.
I heard they shorten their training too.
Yes.
In order to get them over there. So that's, absolutely. Shortcuts were pretty much everywhere, I guess. So you're over there at CCK, and so what was your first impressions about CCK?
Well, it was a brand new thing for me. I'd never been out of the United States, but I was older than a lot of other people that were there. I was, what, 20, almost 25. No, I was 25 when I went over there. Versus some guys who were going over there, especially enlisted guys, 18, 19 years old. And some of our other pilots, navigators, and some of the flight engineers, they were only in their early 20s. So I was a little older than some of the other guys.
Okay.
A lot of good camaraderie among the air crew. We were very tight-knit. Quite often we flew with the same guys. We'd be a set crew. So the same aircraft commander, co-pilot, navigator, flight engineer, and loadmaster. And we really worked hard together and became a really good unit. If you want to say fighting unit, you can say that, but we became a really good air crew.
Sure.
But then even when you flew with other air crews or flew with guys from other squadrons, we just developed this community, this C-130 community. And somebody says today, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm a C-130 pod. Well, welcome to the club. We don't care. He's 25 and I'm in my 70s. Doesn't matter. We have this affinity for one another.
Right.
It was a different kind of airplane.
It's an incredible airplane. It's still being used.
Yeah, it's still being used, but I think the latest versions are the P models, and they have a reserve wing in Colorado Springs, the 302nd, which is the same air wing my dad was at Clinton County Air Force Base here in Ohio, just south of here. Flying C-119 flying boxcars. So
it's pretty crazy.
So there's a little history with that wing from my dad. But we're just close-knit people, and and so if we lost an aircraft or we lost some of our friends, it didn't matter what squadron you're in, because we'd have rivalries, for sports and that kind of thing. But when it came to doing the job, we were very close-knit people.
Right. That was very cool. Okay, so you're at CCK, and what year roughly was this that you arrived at CCK?
I arrived there in late August of 1971 after going through jungle survival school at Clark Air Base in the Philippines.
Okay.
And they told me what squadron I was assigned to, the 776 Tactical Airlift Squadron, and the wing was the 374 Tactical Airlift Wing. We had 4 squadrons, as I said before, and they got me checked out over water just to make sure I could do it. So I flew like to Korea, to Okinawa, Japan, or maybe to Guam, or fly in country to, as we called it, to Tonsanute Air Base. Just an overwater mission. Okay, yeah, you got us here. One ride, that was it. And then they'd fly in country doing different missions for a week or so, and then they would check you off. Some guys it took a little longer than that. Most of us it was about 7 days. And they say, okay, here you are. You're qualified to fly by yourself. Have fun. So I get off of my first mission. I get off of my final ride and check out in country, and I go up and for our crew debriefing, and they say, Lieutenant Lentz, stick around. Okay. And the rest of the crew goes off to go to the club, whatever. And what do you need? And they said, we're sending you back to CCK tomorrow morning to train you to be a bomber, to drop bombs. And I'm going, I didn't sign up for any SAC. I don't want to drop bombs. No, this is different. You'll like it. So I get back to the base, and there's a crew from Clark, and they're getting ready to close their unit down. And so they come up to CCK to train some air crews from a couple different squadrons on how to drop 15,000-pound bombs left over from World War II to make helicopter landing pads for the Army. Okay. And so I went through the training, went back to Vietnam, got checked out. They said, after I got checked out, I think we only had one mission. Everything went right. That's it, you're signed off. I get back to then I go do other missions, normal missions, and then I go back to CCK, and they go, you're now an instructor navigator for this bombing missions only. And you're going to train everybody else, other navigators that we need. You're going to do the training. Here's all the books. You get to do that. I just pinned on first lieutenant. I mean, just pinned on first lieutenant when they tell me all this. And here I am telling guys that have been navigators for 10 years, 15 years, how we're going to drop these bombs out of the backs of C-130s. So it was a different mission, and some of the missions we actually did drop them so that the Army could go in and take control of an area. Mm-hmm. Later on, as time went on, I dropped some that were not dropped just to make landing zones. And by the way, when they dropped them on landing zones, usually there were a lot of Viet Cong around, and anything within about the 0.6 of a mile, 1 kilometer radius of that bomb would be, if not killed, they were knocked unconscious or their heads were ringing, and the Army could just come in and clean up. Mm. In 1972, I had a mission up along the Laotian, North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese border on Highway 23, and 2 of us took off out of Cam Ranh Bay and flew up there. And the first airplane dropped their bomb, and from 22,000 feet, this was no small feat, because you had to fly at a certain airspeed, and when the bomb started to go out, the airplane's nose would pitch up like this to 17 degrees. And you're at such a slow speed, your props are barely turning any air. Yeah. Our worry was we could stall and go right down with the bomb. So, but they drop their bomb, and it hits the hillside and closes up the highway. And that's what we thought we were doing. That's all we thought we were doing. We're going to do it twice, and at least slow down the North Vietnamese from coming south for 72 hours. Because that's all it would take. So they fly off, we come in, we make our drop, and you're talking with a forward air controller, flying an OV-10 aircraft below us. And so we make the drop, and after a couple of minutes I say, okay, how's it looking? He says, all he would say is stand by, stand by. I said, what's our battle damage assessment, or BDA? Stand by, stand by. This goes on for 5 or 6 minutes, and we have plenty of fuel, but we're close enough that the MiGs could come after us. So and we don't have any fighter escort, other than there happened to be an RF-4C taking pictures. And we'd see him every little bit, but he just had a couple of machine guns, 20 Mike machine guns, and finally, after 5 or 6 minutes, the guy finally comes back and says, this is Covey 10 square 626, you ready to copy? Ready to copy. He says, we have 2 bunkers, two 37 millimeter cannons, 5 or 6 trucks, 250 dead NVA that we can see, and multiple secondary explosions. I think you can call that a shack, which means we had hit the target. We had no idea that what we were really dropping on and trying to hit was one of their shelters built into the side of a mountain. And somehow our bomb hit at just the right spot. Wow. And right as they went to bed, early in the morning. So that was one of my more exciting missions. I can't remember if it was a couple months before. but I think this happened later. But probably the most exciting and serious operation I took part in was the Easter offensive of 1972 by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, coordinated coming in and to take over a town called An Loc in preparation for trying to overrun Saigon at the time, Ho Chi Minh City today. And they came in through Cambodia, and they marched to this town and surrounded this army of Republic of Vietnam unit with U.S. advisors, and that started on April 5th. And the only way to resupply them was airdrop, and they tried to do it from high altitude, from C-130s, and the food, the ammunition never got to the ground. It got to the ground, to the Army units a mile, 2 miles away, but it didn't, the North Vietnamese units, but it didn't get to the people that needed it. So on Friday, April 14th, the co-pilot and I came back from playing some golf. We were on alert. So they could call us any time of the day. And we show up, and there's a note on the door, report to the briefing room here for intel briefing at 1600 hours, 4 p.m. for all you civilians. And so we got our gear together, jumped on the crew bus with the enlisted guys, and we met our aircraft commander, who wasn't the guy it was supposed to be. It was a different aircraft commander. The name was, aircraft commander was Phil Clark, and the guy we met up with was Bill Buddha Caldwell. And so our mission was to go out on a 3-ship, flying in trail, which meant our standard procedure was the lead aircraft would be in the lead and 2,000 feet back. Slightly to the right would be the second aircraft, and the third aircraft would be back another 2,000 feet in trail. And we'd just come over and start at 6,000 feet, descend down to 600 feet, and drop these pallets of ammunition. They were a cardboard with like baffles in them to cushion when they hit the ground so they don't go off. Mm-hmm. They were crated, and then they're on wooden pallets, and they just got little chutes to help them go off. And each plane was carrying 12 pallets. Well, as we go out to do all of our pre-flight, I look up and I see this huge thunderstorm far to the north, which is where we were going. And so I checked on my radar, and sure enough, there's a thunderstorm. I tell Buddha, and he calls control. The weather people there at Tan Son Nhut confirm there's thunderstorms over there. They're not going away anytime soon, and they scrub the mission. And we're to report back at 0800 hours the next morning. And so in the morning briefing, it was decided that we would take off as a 3-ship, but we wouldn't go over in trail. One aircraft would go in. We were going to come in from the southeast, and make the drop, climb back to altitude, and escape to the northwest. And the other 2 aircraft would loiter, and the second plane would go in, and then finally the third plane would go in. We'd just fly in an orbit. And the first airplane goes in, and they got 1 shot in the tail. So there's a little delay for the second plane, and you get AC-130 gunships, the Spookies, and they're firing, and you got the Vietnamese Air Force flying A-37s, and they're firing rockets and stuff. And the second airplane, as they're doing their last checks, they get a problem with the load. It's not going to go off out the doors, so they have to turn around and go back to Tan Son Nhut, to Saigon. And so it's our turn. And so we start the standard drop, and we get to 4,000 feet. It's April. That's when they're burning all the rice fields. And so you can't see the ground as you get down to about 4,000 feet. So we decided to come in from a completely different heading, completely different direction than the other 2 guys were headed in, and to go down to to where we could see the ground, which was about 1,500 feet, then drop down to 600 feet, drop the pallets, and get out of there. And so I tell the crew at the 1 minute, we have these different warnings, 5 minutes, 1 minute, and so forth. And I said, at the 1 minute warning, when we get there and I say 5 second warning, don't get antsy before I say the magic words. Because you never said green light until it was time to drop.
Right.
Okay. So nobody does something crazy and releases the pallets and they're trying to go out while the back door's still up or it's down. Either way. And so everybody, roger that, Nav. And normally in a C-130, the aircraft commander on the left and the co-pilot's on the right, and the flight engineer sits on a pedestal chair in the middle, and I'm on the right, all my stuff's on the right side. And usually you have a drop point on the right side of the aircraft so you can be near all my instruments. Mm-hmm. Well, this time, because we changed how we were coming in, I had to be behind the aircraft commander. And it's probably the only reason I'm alive today. So we get the 1 minute warning, and just before I was going to say crew nav, 5 second warning, loud explosion in the back of the aircraft. And I said, crew nav, we're taking hits. 5 second warning. 8 seconds later, I go green light. And just as I say green light, I get knocked to the floor. And I'm laying there, not concerned about me at the moment. I'm going, oh, the pallets are going off. And I hear rumble, 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 rumble. Okay, we got the drop off. So then I check me, and if you've ever watched any of the old World War II movies, and some of it real clips, and you see the B-24s or B-17s and the cockpit's all shot up, and the co-pilot, he's over there and he's got a bloodied arm, and, the pilot's missing a leg, but they're still flying the airplane trying to keep it stable and get it somewhere. And so I look at the pilots, nope, they're okay. And then I'm laying almost underneath the flight engineer. I look up and a third of his head's gone. He'd taken one of the rounds right through his head. And so then I start feeling me, and all I find is a little blood and some sticky stuff in here, which was nothing, in my neck, and a small hole in my flight suit about as big as my finger from shrapnel off the aircraft. So I get up and I get on oxygen for a couple of minutes just to make sure my head stays clear, and so I can think and be help to the crew. And then smoke started coming into the cockpit, and Staff Sergeant Charlie Schaub comes up and says, Nav, pull the overhead hatch, get the smoke out. I said, I don't know if I can do that. I got wounded in the arm. I don't know how bad it is. He says, okay, you get the two pilot's windows and the side windows and open them up. And he takes out so we can clear the cockpit of all the smoke. And then we figure out what's going on in the back of the plane. And we then see, as we're climbing up to 2,500 feet to go back to Saigon, we see that we have fire warning lights in the two left engines. So Sergeant Schaub from the cargo department, myself from the pilot's side window, we scan, we don't see any fire, but we're watching the temperature gauges, and they're going almost off the charts. And so the pilot, co-pilot, with a little help from me running the engineer's checklists and them doing all the work, we shut down the two left engines, 1 and 2, on the left side of the airplane. Which means our hydraulic system doesn't work for the landing gear. So now we're flying back, and you've got to get the landing gear down so we can land. And it won't come down. So the pilot sends me back there, and I'm thinking, why are you sending me back there? The loadmasters know everything to do. If they can't get it down, what good am I going to do to go down there? But I go back, and it doesn't come down again, and then I come back up, and I'm one of these weird navigators who actually studied the whole C-130 tech order on the airplane. And something occurs to me, and I look at the lower circuit breaker panel by the co-pilot, which is where the shell had come through the cockpit, and I see these two circuit breakers that say landing gear, and they're still in. So I get the engineer's checklist, and I say, co-pilot, one more time, slowly go through the checklist. And this time, he doesn't skip what he had accidentally skipped the other 3 times. Pull the circuit breakers on the co-pilot's lower circuit breaker panel. I knelt down and I pulled them. The loadmasters start cranking the gear again, and that thunk coming down was the greatest feeling you could have.
I bet.
Is that landing gear. The nose gear comes down by itself. It's kind of, you push a button and it's gravity. It was gravity feed, so that wasn't a problem. So it was a very eventful flight, and a very interesting story about what happened in the back. When there's a fire that started, Sergeant Schaub went to put it out and grabbed a red hot fire extinguisher. Burned his hands because he didn't have his gloves on. So, but he gets that to work, then he gets his gloves on, and now the green light comes, and he and a Vietnamese loadmaster, plus our other loadmaster, Airman First Class David McAleese, they pull the locks so the rails, the pallets go out, except the first 2 pallets were on fire. And cardboard and wood, they kind of meshed together. So the Vietnamese loadmaster and Charlie Schaub pushed those last 2 pallets off the airplane and then hung on the back looking down and saw them start exploding. Fortunately, that was at 300 feet, but by this time we're a mile. They start exploding, we're a mile, 2 miles away. And so we're not in any danger any longer. But if they hadn't done that, I would not be sitting here talking to you today.
Right.
And after that's when Charlie came up and we started doing all these other things, make sure there's no more fire in the cockpit and the engines and all that. So we fly back to Saigon. I'm doing all the radio calls for emergency and all this stuff to various agencies while the pilots are just taking control of the airplane, flying on 2 engines. The 2 engines out's not a big deal in a C-130. So as we're coming into land, I'm standing doing engineer things and the pilot's doing some on his side of the panel. By this time I know I can move my arm. And all of a sudden, when you come into land, you'll come in and you'll do a base leg. I mean, a lot of the airlines today, they start out 20 miles out and just come in one straight sloop. But we're coming in at low level, so we would come in on a base leg, in this case a right-hand base leg, to land on the right runway. And just as we turn like this, the number 3 engine, all the gauges go right down to 30%. And the aircraft commander looks at me and goes, "Damn, did you see that?" "Yeah, pilot, I saw that. But we can make the runway on 1 engine at this point." And then just as we rolled out on final, the co-pilot's flying. For whatever reason, the aircraft commander let the co-pilot fly the airplane. And he's just monitoring the controls. And the engine comes back up to full speed. So we land on the runway, taxi, plane goes stop. They shut down the runway, fire trucks, ambulances all come out. They whisk Charlie Schaub, and Staff Sergeant Schaub and myself, and take us to the hospital. The co-pilot had a couple little things of shrapnel. Nobody even bothered with him for a day or 2. They took him and the pilot and the other loadmaster in for a debrief. And then Charlie tells me about the stuff I just related about pushing the pallets off and all this. If you read the Air War of Southeast Asia Tactical Airlift, Roy Bowers says that our mission was ineffective. The pallets didn't make the drop zone. That's false information. And the reason I know is the Army major advisor on the ground was wounded on April 16th and ended up in the same hospital ward with me at the Army 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon, and came up to me on the 17th to offer condolences about the loss of Tech Sergeant John Sanders, our flight engineer, and to let me know that our 10 pallets and the 12 pallets dropped by the first aircraft had all landed on this little tiny DZ.
Wow.
And when I say tiny, you're talking a soccer field, 270 square yards max.
Jeez.
That's not like 2 miles by 1 mile by 2 miles that we were used to dropping on. And he confirmed the 2 pallets exploding in midair. But, and so that's kind of the story of the first missions into Anlock in April. Those went on for another 6-8 weeks. We lost 4 aircraft and 3 aircrew, 17 guys in total. 1 aircraft was shot up, and I don't remember if they'd done their drop or not, but they were on fire and turned back towards Saigon. And a flight of 10 various different Army helicopters, including Apaches and what we would call slick Hueys, but they had 50 cal guns, right, carrying some army troops. They saw the plane, they aborted their mission, followed the airplane to where it crash landed, and did fire suppression while the Hueys landed, and they went and they got our crews out. It took about 20 minutes. And both the loadmasters were kind of smashed between what we call a buffer board and the back of the car, or the front end of the cargo compartment. One of them, Charlie Bemis, his back was fractured. He ended up 2 beds down from me in the Army 3rd Field Hospital. And I got to hear his story. He could move his arms and legs, but he had to be in that cast from his thighs to under his arms, just to stabilize his spine. And he went back to flying, and he's and he's still around. And so that was that was just the start, though, of what was going to be, like I said, a 6-week-long period for us in the spring of '72.
My goodness.
And then near the end of my tour, I was privileged to be on a C-130 crew that would lead the C-141s into Hanoi for the prisoner exchanges.
Oh, wow.
It was near the end of March, so the prisoner exchange has been going on for 8 weeks, I guess, at that point. But it was sometime in March. And so we got to spend time in Hanoi. And so I got to navigate the airplane in there, and then the C-141, it would come in behind us. This was the rules the UN set up with the North Vietnamese. And we got to escort people back, and they gave you a list when you got off the airplane. They said, this is what, go to lunch. The North Vietnamese is going to give you lunch, which included a beer. So those of us that flew the airplane in had a beer. The guys who was going back didn't. Not very good beer. And out of proof for much water. And then we go back out, and we had gone through the list, and believe it or not, there were 6 guys that I knew that were being released that day. They'd been in anywhere from 6 months to 15 months.
Wow.
Because the guys that had been there the longest came home first. That's the way they did that for the release of prisoners back there in 1973. And you'd see these guys, so North Vietnamese general would, here comes this prisoner, he'd turn him over to an American general who would turn him over to an Air Force colonel, or an Army colonel who would turn him over to an aircrew member like us from either the 141 or the C-130. And these guys, it's when they saw somebody they knew, I mean all of them, but the minute you met they met that general, and then the colonel, and then they'd see somebody they actually knew. Their faces would light up, tears would be coming down, and you'd walk them back to the C-141, a couple hundred yards, and talk with them a little bit, and then you turn around and go back, and they would space the guys so that you had time to go there, come back, and then get the next guy that you knew. But 3 of the guys I knew were over there. One of them I thought was dead, and the 5th one I didn't realize he was even MIA.
Wow.
So that was a great experience as part of my Southeast Asia experience.
Yeah.
And then I went home, back to the U.S., and went to C-141s at Travis Air Force Base, and got to fly more missions in 74, 75 into Thailand and Vietnam until everything was shut down in Vietnam in May 15th of 75. still fly into Thailand and so forth, bring it back unit, primarily Air Force units.
Yeah. That's incredible. Let me just ask you this real quick, because I gotta know. So after that first experience, where in the C-130 you're making that drop and you guys get hit pretty bad. Once you finally recover and you have to make that decision of going back into the C-130, going back into there. And
I didn't have a decision to make. It was.
Yeah.
Okay. So I spent about 9 to 10 days in the Army 3 Field Hospital, and then the Army wanted me to stay in Vietnam long enough for them to take out my stitches.
Okay.
So about 2.5 weeks after the event, I went back to the CCK, took a flight physical, was found physically able to fly, but they wanted me to take convalescent leave. I wanted to go to Hong Kong and Bali, and they said, no, you can only go back home to the United States. So I did that, and I went back to the United States for about 24 days, and then just after my 26th birthday, the end of May, I came back to the CCK and got rechecked out. They had me do an overwater flight, right, and the flight surgeon reconfirmed I'm good to go. And we go back in country, and it's sometime in late June, and we're doing these missions at a place called Kontum, and we called it Kansas City. Okay. And so my first mission in there is the place is being mortared off and on. There's a lot of fighting going on around Kontum. And so we're going to do night missions. We're going to come over a hill, drop down. As soon as we hit the runway, the back ramp comes level, and then we put the back ramp down. The top, so in a 130 you had the back ramp here and a door here, and the door would go up like that, and the ramp would go down like this, so those could go out. And as we went down the runway, we're leaving the palace behind.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're leaving the palace behind, and as we're coming in, we got some security police dude with a gun standing in the doorway, and as we're coming in there, he fires off a couple of rounds to make sure his weapon works. And we made the loadmaster take the weapons away from him, made him go sit in the seat and make him buckle in the seat, because we don't want rounds coming from our airplane and somebody shooting at us. And you see the ground fire going on, and I'm kind of nervous. I mean, I'm back in combat. You know, we could get mortared, we could get shot. We've been briefed on all this. And I'm pretty nervous. I'm doing my job, but inside, man, I'm really nervous. And we come down, and we land, we get down the end of the runway, and we take back off. We were on the runway 2 minutes and 55 seconds. From the time we touched down, the time we were gear up with the back ramp still open. It wasn't down, but it was still open. Then we would close it, and we got out of there. And we did that 6 more times. And after the first time, I was no longer nervous. Wow. I said, "Yep, we're back to doing our job. You know, and as long as we do our job and do it right, we're okay." And we got down to 1 minute and 55 seconds.
Wow. So the training just kind of took over at that point.
Right. I mean, we're dropping them, and these guys are coming out with forklifts, moving them, clearing the runway. We turn around and go right back the other way.
Wow.
And we weren't the only. I mean, you know, the average time, generally speaking, was 2.5 to 3 minutes for most aircraft. I mean, it was very efficient. And so after that, it was, you know, no more fear.
It's pretty incredible. So I'm a non-combat veteran, and I admire anybody that has experienced that kind of stuff and is able to get back to it. It's just awesome. It's really cool. So you end up retiring where after?
I ended up. I was the deputy base commander at San Vito Air Station in Italy.
Oh, okay.
And I was passed over for colonel because I hadn't filled the billet of having a staff job at the higher headquarters, and there was a whole bunch of reasons, some of them beyond my control, that didn't happen. I had higher headquarters that wanted me, fought over me for staff jobs, and the fly guys made me go back to flying to the Philippines. And then I was offered the chance at a staff job right here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with the logistics unit with a 4-star general that I knew very well. But my wife and kids, every time we came back here to Ohio, their asthma kicked in.
Yeah.
We didn't really want to come here. And so I chose the deputy base commander's job that I was offered in Italy. Sometimes in retrospect, I wish I had come here anyway. Because I probably would have made 06. But that's neither. And today, you know, that's neither here nor there, you know, 26 years later. And so some friends invited me to come to Colorado Springs. My family was down in Wichita Falls, Texas with her parents. And after a few months, I found a job in the insurance industry, which I didn't like very well, but I was decent at it. And my family moved up to Colorado Springs in January of 1994, and we've been living there ever since.
Wow.
I'd like to readdress some of the aftermath of our mission. While I was in the hospital, our awards and decorations officer, who was also my chief navigator, came to me, and I could only move my arm like this because of the stitches. And he had me write out what happened. And so the plan was to put Staff Sergeant Schaub in for the Medal of Honor for saving our crew in the airplane. And I don't know the machinations that happened after that, but he and the aircraft commander, Buda Caldwell, were both given the Air Force Cross. Lieutenant John Herring, the co-pilot, was given the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. John Sanders, the flight engineer, was killed, was posthumously given the Silver Star and the Purple Heart, and I received the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. And then David McAleese also received the Silver Star because he wasn't wounded. And so at that point, we were one of the highest decorated C-130 crews ever. Other crews got very similar awards after that, and before us too, in Vietnam. The other crews too received those kinds of decorations and awards. The mission I talked about earlier over on Highway 23 over the Laos and North Vietnamese border, each member of our crew was given a Distinguished Flying Cross. The other crew didn't get anything, but then they missed the bunker and hit the hillside. So it's, in that kind of case, it was the luck of the draw, I guess, so to speak. And one other side note was when the mechanics looked over our airplane. So 10 days after when I got out of the hospital, I had to go out and get my gear. Nobody brought my navigator's gear off the airplane. And so these two staff sergeants are sitting there talking and cursing us for shutting down 2 good engines and making them do work on 2 engines. There was nothing wrong with them. There were no fire in the engines. It happened because we hadn't closed what we call a bleed air duct, where hot air moves along the wing, and that was what was giving us false indications, but we didn't know that. And so I said, well, I was a navigator on a plane, and we had fire warning indications. We didn't see any fire, but we shut them down because the temperature gauge was so high. And the guy says, well, that was really crazy. But the other thing, one of them says, but the other thing I want to know is, or maybe you should know, there's no way your other 2 engines should have been even turning. You guys should have crashed when you shut down 1 and 2. He says, what do you mean? Well, each of those engines took 12 rounds of 51 caliber fire, machine gun bullets, 12 rounds. And later we find out that number 4 shouldn't have been, the one engine we thought was the best engine, wasn't running right either, and the prop was pitch locked so it wasn't this way to the wind, it was actually that way in the wind. Yeah. So we should have never made it back to Saigon.
That is crazy.
Real crazy.
Wow, I got goosebumps.
But those are some of the things you find out after the fact from talking to other people.
Yeah.
So, but that was just a very exciting time in our life, and like I mentioned earlier, a sad time for our wing when you lose air crew members like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so wrapping up here, are you, now that you're in Colorado now,
Yes.
retired out in Colorado, are you a part of any veteran organizations out there?
Not really. Not
Okay.
really. I do, I do support the DAV,
Yeah.
Disabled American Vets some. They helped me redo my disability rating, and when I was in the military, I had some problems with my upper back. I didn't realize it was degenerative arthritis and some in my lower back, and so they got that all reapproved and put my rating up for that. But I don't do a lot of things. I don't belong to the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I'm just not a big go to a lot of meetings and drink beer.
Right.
So I've worked with a few people, help them out here and there, but not any big organization. This is only the second reunion I've come to.
Oh, really?
The other one was in 2016 at Air Force Academy, where some Air Force Academy grad C-130 people got together with a bunch of guys like me that go to the academy, and a lot of our flight engineers and lift masters, and about 100 of us showed up at the Air Force Academy. They have there a Southeast Asia memorial, and every plaque on there was to some kind of fighter plane or forward air controller type aircraft. There's nothing for C-130s, and it took them 2 years of fighting to get together. And so we all got together there and told stories of different events. I told this, and people told stories of from the 1967, 68, 69 that were as tense and in some ways as horrific as what I just described today. It was a great, great meeting, and from 3-star generals, down to retired staff sergeants that were there. I mean, we were all there, and we're all that C-130 brotherhood.
Yeah.
And it was that was a good meeting. There was a couple others I wanted to come to here in last October at Wright Pat, but I was in Germany and got home the day before it was supposed to start, and I'd been in Germany for 5 weeks, so that was out. And so the plane that I was shot on, aircraft 621787, is on display in Hangar 4 since June 8th of 2016, and it was out on the ramp since 2012, and I saw it a couple times, and I was back here in February, and they were kind enough, they don't do this anymore, but they were kind enough to open up the cockpit and allow me only to go up and sit in my navigator chair, and they took a couple pictures of that. And that was one of the reasons we're having our CCK reunion here, is because of that airplane being in Hangar 4.
Hangar 4, yeah. That's awesome. That is very cool. How did that feel, sitting back in your old seat?
It was kind of neat. I didn't have a rush of these, the feelings, other than it was nice to be in a C-130 again. And actually, I've been in C-130s a couple of times with the 302nd Air Wing, but yeah, it was different coming on that airplane, the Rock, as it's called, and sitting there and just for a couple of minutes and looking around the airplane. I took a few pictures of, the cockpit. But it may be different tomorrow when we're outside of it and all of us get our picture taken together in front of the aircraft. We'll see. But it's neat.
That's very cool. This of course is going to be archived, and there is for future generations. This will be available for them to listen to your story. What message would you like to leave for them?
That those of us who are fighting on the lines, I don't care, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Special Forces, we're not doing it out of pride for ourselves. We're doing it out of love of country and to keep the American people free, even if it doesn't always seem that we're doing. That's our job. But our job was to stop enemy aggression. We did our job. I think the politicians failed in theirs, but we did our job in protecting the world from nuclear holocausts and breaking down the Soviet Union and the Cold War. And what I went through is nothing compared to what your generation's going through with Iraq, Afghanistan, and the continued deployments. You know, Fort Carson, every couple months we lose one or two men at Fort Carson who are over on deployments. We lost a couple of guys from the Air Force Academy who were on deployment over there. So it really hits home the things we're trying to do, and we are trying to do it for the right reasons. I can't speak to politicians. I can only speak to the military.
Is there anything that you feel that may have been left out that you'd like to add?
Oh boy. Funny or
whatever you want.
No. It's tough to say. I served a lot in Europe, and there were great assignments. My last assignment, we helped turn San Vito Air Station, a little small air station with about 1,400 Air Force, 150 Navy, and 6 Army guys, and we, in just less than 36 hours, we turned it into a Special Forces support base. Now, we don't have an airfield. We use the Italian airfield at Brindisi, but we got it all set up, communication and everything. From the time I got a 2-star general's called, my base commander was off somewhere at USAFE at a meeting, and we got everything set up, and the guys wanted to know if they could come in 48 hours, and 24 hours later they were starting to deploy into the base. The 2-star general couldn't believe it. And our primary mission was to UN support for Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina in that big internecine battle, so to speak, of the breakup of Yugoslavia and the different ethnic groups and religious groups fighting one another. And so my career, I left a couple of months later after they all deployed in. So the end of my career was also kind of fruitful in a way of being active and doing my part in our base, especially our base doing its part to help in another conflict, so to speak. At the same time, you've got things going on in the first Desert Storm back in 1991, 92, and so forth.
Oh, okay.
So
around the same time.
Same time frame. I didn't get deployed. My base commander wouldn't let me leave. I volunteered. He wouldn't let me leave. My wife was happy about that. My kids were happy. So it's kind of sandwiched in, conflicts, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and Bosnia, Herzegovina, and those kind of things. My career was sandwiched by those events.
Wow. It's pretty incredible. Yeah.
And I would do it again. But I'd want to do it. I would want to do it in the old military, not the new military.
It's forever changing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for sitting down
David.
and sharing your story with me. And this concludes with that. This concludes our interview. Thank you for your service, sir. And